Good evening. I'm Pittsburgh City Councilman Daniel Lavelle,
I'm Councilman Reverend Ricky Burgess.
and we welcome you to Black Pittsburgh Matters. Black Pittsburgh Matters is a series of virtual town hall meetings affirming a citywide agenda that Black Pittsburgh does indeed matter. Black Pittsburgh Matters means that Black lives matter. It means we must protect the health and safety of Black people. It means that Black communities matter. We must focus on rebuilding Black communities. And it means that Black wealth matters. We must focus on increasing Black employment and entrepreneurship.
The Black community has been disproportionately affected by two concurrent crises. One, the COVID-19 pandemic and its resulting economic crisis, and two, the race relations and racial justice issue, which are both public health crises. Normally, in times of crisis and great change, we'd be coming to you as the Black elected officials of Pittsburgh and having meetings across the city with our constituents, partners, and allies. Since we cannot do so safely in the current pandemic, we're now using this media and platform to come to you in the ways we can to talk about what we're doing, discuss policy and legislation concerning Black Pittsburgh. These meetings will be available via Facebook, YouTube, and the city's cable channel. You can contact or ask questions via the Black Pittsburgh Matters Facebook page or email us at blackpghmatters, that's blackpghmatters@gmail.com. Or you can comment through our live feed right now. Today's town hall meeting topic is Black Pittsburgh Matters, Black elected officials update.
Reverend Burgess and I are two members of a larger group of governmental officials committed to Black Pittsburgh, the Black Elected Officials Coalition. The PBOC is comprised of 7 Black elected officials from the state, county, and city level committed to a Pittsburgh where African Americans can thrive. While Reverend Burgess and I work on the city level, we coordinate with the PBOC from the county and state levels to realize our shared vision for Black Pittsburgh.
We are honored to be joined tonight by State Representative Jake Wheatley, State County Councilwoman Olivia Bennett, and County Councilman DeWitt Walton. Welcome to this evening's town hall meeting. We're going to use this platform to highlight some of our initiative and legislations we've been working toward to support Black Pittsburgh, to make sure our constituents can be connected to the programs that we're working on and keep everyone abreast of our current agenda. So let's sort of open the floor and discuss, if you don't mind, some of our legislation and initiatives since our last PBOC meeting. And I think maybe one of the things to start to talk about is Lavelle and I are still talking about this education achievement gap and calling an educational emergency in the city of Pittsburgh. And in terms of what we've talked about, we've really only talked about 3 things. One, we've said that because of the pandemic, the schools have been closed, and we know that the kids are further behind in terms of the academic achievement gap. 2, we talked about how we can all work together to improve the educational outcome of kids. And then 3, we've sort of talked about how we can reopen the schools, that we know that, online learning is not for everyone. And certainly many of our children have not even linked in, have not even signed in. And how can we safely open the schools? And so I don't know if you want to say something about that, Daniel, first, and then let's sort of open up to the panel to talk about, achievement gap and what we can do collectively to improve educational quality for our kids.
Sure. So I guess before opening up, to give some of my perspective, as you all know, I have 2 young children who are in the Pittsburgh public school systems. That was done intentionally because I do believe that we have some very good schools, and we have some administrators and some principals and some teachers who do phenomenal work. And if not for that reason, I wouldn't have entered my children into the system. With that being said, I've been having conversations for at least the last year with my own principal of my school, with other administrators, with teachers, about the concerns that we were facing since COVID shut down. We all knew that there was already an achievement gap within the system, right? We already knew that. But then COVID, like it has done to every other thing, has sort of exasperated the problem and shown some of the issues. So a while back, I started having conversations around how are we going to catch children up, right? So if you take my own children as an example, when COVID shut down, my son was in first grade, so he lost some of his first grade learning. Now during COVID, he's lost some of his second grade learning. So what's the plan to catch him up before he actually goes into third grade? And so I started talking about the fact that I thought PPS needed to be looking at going to school year round, really beginning this summer, because I believe those children are going to need that level of instruction. And so we were having these conversations. Reverend Burgess and I were having sort of weekly conversations around education. And then something else happened. I was talking to my school board member who asked, had I read the report from the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission on the Pittsburgh Public Schools that was released last October? And I told him no, I had not. And then I read it. And then I shared it with Reverend Burgess, and he read it. And both of us had the exact same conclusion, which is we are absolutely in a state of emergency. When you look at some of the numbers that are within that report, that are decades old, mind you, and now COVID has just exacerbated the problem. And so, what we felt was imperative was that we begin having sort of a public conversation about how we come out of this and how we collectively put our roll up our sleeves and join our efforts to address this issue, because clearly it's going to take the entire community getting behind it and having a conversation about how we reimagine our school system and how we educate our children and get them up to where they be. So that's why we then introduced the resolution, so that we could begin having a public conversation about how we come together to address the concerns. With that being said, I will open it up to whomever wants to begin. Do you all agree with us that we are in a state of educational emergency? If so, why or why not? Or what are your thoughts on the matter?
So I'll begin. First of all, I want to thank you and both you, Daniel and Rev, for your leadership and your commitment and service to the city and to the folk in the city. We all know from a systemic perspective, we've been in a state of an emergency as it relates to education and health and social conditions for years. This is nothing new. I think the COVID environment has exacerbated many of our ills and social conditions. I mean, to the education point, I want to take some time to give credit to Tomanika Howes and Wanda Henderson, Dr. Sizemore, and others in the advocate community, because for 30 years, almost 30 years, they've been fighting this educational fight. And that report that you referenced is really a combination of their year-to-year effort to try to get some of the conditions addressed that started 30 years ago. You know what I'm saying? From the time that they first started this fight. And I think what we're seeing is systemically, we have to take a step back. And again, I like to say to people, this is not an attack on any one set of group. This is not an attack on teachers, not an attack on the administration. It's not an attack on us as policymakers, because we've all kind of failed our families in this conversation. And I think now is the moment and the time for us to really take a step back and really try to dig in and see what we have to do it. Is partly the way that we disperse our resources, but it's not just about resources. It's partly the way that we kind of have our educational system set up as deliver the service. We still set up in a day and age that has long since passed. So we have to look at the way that we deliver the service. And I think in this environment, we have to also talk about how we really treat children as individuals and not as widgets. Like they all learn at the same pace, they all learn in the same rate. And so I think as we come together, we need to really take this moment of time to really look at the various pieces and how do we fit them together and make it more impactful. So, you know, I'm very much committed to that, and I'm glad that you all have started this process and this conversation, and I'm hoping that all of our stakeholder groups will be willing to come together and address it.
From my perspective, I appreciate the start that you guys are leading, and Jake's comment. None of this conversation should be viewed as an attack on anyone, on any individual, or any individual group, as opposed to a recognition that an emergency does exist and that we have to have real candid conversations and frank conversations about how we address the inequities, the challenges that we're confronted with, and come up with meaningful, sustainable solutions to improve educational environment, the educational environment, and outcomes, because it all has to be outcome based. It all has, and nothing matters other than creating an environment in which children can learn and thrive. If we don't do that, our society suffers. We may have to debate vigorously the protocols and the methodologies, but at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is that children win. That children win. We have to submit to the notion that children must win.
The reason why I hesitated to comment is because I no longer have kids in PPS. And so I try not to overextend into areas that I am not directly impacted. And so, being that I did have kids in PPS, I did have, my son graduated in 2020. So the remainder of his school year was in COVID. And so there were challenges with access and with getting information and things like that. But again, my kid has now exited the system, so I can't speak firsthand on what experiences are presently with PPS, but always supporting and encouraging of new innovation. I think that we've been forced to think about new innovation in the time of COVID. And then some of the hurdles, like I talked to my daughter today, and she has my grandson home schooling, and he has two younger sisters, so it's just not a conducive learning environment. And one sister's upstairs screaming her head off, the other one's so and then she's like, well, he can't focus. Well, I wonder why. So I think we do need to start having the conversation about if we're not going back to school, what maybe trying to make mini huddles or bubbles and getting kids into different silos to be able to still get into a place where it's a conducive environment to learn, but also being mindful that we are still in a pandemic. So I don't envy any person who is in this predicament. I don't envy our Pittsburgh Public School board. These are hard times and hard decisions, and yeah, so.
And again, if I can, I wanted to, Councilwoman Bennett brings up a great point. I want to kind of separate the two conversations. The pandemic, global pandemic, showed one set of challenges to our system. But let's be clear, our educational system had a crisis well before the pandemic started. So the systemic challenges to our educational process requires certain types of reforms to it. The situation that we're currently in with the global pandemic, which is not the fault of anyone other than poor leadership from the top on down, as relates to making sure we were managing this process better, making sure all of our essential workers, including our teachers and our staffs in our schools, are vaccinated and had the equipment necessary to really deliver what we needed them to deliver. That's a failure of the system, not of the people inside of the system. That's a failure of leadership. So I wanted to be clear to say that. But the challenges that I think you and Councilman Lavelle and Councilman Burgess is trying to get at are systemic challenges that happened well before this pandemic hit. So, I think that's really how we want to approach this. We want to understand, we want to be understanding of the challenges of the pandemic caused, but we also know that there are some real educational systemic challenges that we need to address, and we need to address that well before this thing hit.
And as you know, Jake, if we don't address this, the single biggest sort of indicator of a child's future is its zip code, its area code, right? And kids that are growing up in challenging communities, if they don't have good education, we kind of know where their future is going to be, right? They're going to, unfortunately, they're going to go into the prison system or the criminal justice system. They're going to, be underemployed, perhaps, have problems with alcohol and drugs, and children out of wedlock without being in committed relationships. There's just a variety of risk factors that multiplies when the kids are not, able to succeed academically. I teach a part of my, as you know, I teach college, but we have a parallel program. So where high school students take college classes. So I actually have high school students every semester, have for many years. I don't talk about it, but I actually have high school students. And they tend to be the more gifted students that I get, actually, but they're still high school students. And I have, of course, family members. But a lot of these kids, my nephews, their grandnephews, they struggle academically, right? They are struggling before COVID, right? They have difficulty reading, they have difficulty doing math. We're not doing a good job of teaching kids how to read, write, speak, and do mathematics on a grade appropriate level. We're not doing a good job of that. We're not doing a good job for all kids, and we're particularly not doing a good job with African American kids. But it's always been bad, but I would believe COVID has made it just worse. If you were to test these kids right now, you would probably see the lowest achievement rates probably in 120 years, some great number like that. I mean, it's just because they haven't had instruction for so long. They've lost somewhere between a year and a half and 2 years of academic learning. So if they were already behind and they lose 2 more years, then they're way behind. So that's why we have to now start to address this. And I'll get off my soapbox in a minute. I have tried to say it means everybody has to help. Every parent, every grandparent, every church, every pastor, every city, every government, everybody has to help and make these kids a priority.
Well, but that's why I think what Councilman Lavelle started off with is important for us, Rev. I think the fact of the matter is we all can accept there have probably been some slippage in academic learning from all children, but especially those children that were already struggling. But I think that's why if we have to have a plan for how we catch these children up, right? And that plan is going to require resources, financial resources, as well as other resources to really dig in and catch the kids where they are. Like I reject this notion that there are bad children who can't learn. It's bad systems and how we expose them, right? So we try to fit children who might be square into circular systems of learning, and I think we have to change that dynamic. And I'm gonna keep pressing this point. If you want to catch these kids up, you have to have acceleration to it, but you have to have acceleration that's done in a way that meets the kid where they are, and then takes them from where they are to where we want them to be. And that's not going to be from A to Z overnight. That's going to require constant attention and time on task. And so this is where I think we all have a responsibility. I might be a state rep, you all are city council person, there are county council people here. We don't have direct say on the policy making of the district, but we all have roles to play to make sure they have what they need in order for them to perform the way that we need them to perform. And we all have to hold ourselves accountable and hold these systems that we are a part of accountable to make sure these kids and these families get what they need in the time and the way that they need them. And I think that's where we have to have this flexibility and this willingness to change up from where we used to be and how things used to be done to now figuring out how we have to be more creative to catch these kids up.
Jake, I agree. We have to take a holistic approach to resolving this issue. And we have to use our legislative abilities, our policy-making abilities, and our moral authority to do all of these things. For example, Allegheny County Council, in its last budget, just approved the Children's Fund. We haven't put a dollar value on it, but we did a ton of work. And it's about early childhood development, preschool, and after school programs. All of those have to be combined with work by our educational institution, PPS, and and again, those candid kind of conversations about as you said, meeting the children where they are, and building an infrastructure that addresses learning and individualized learning, so each child has a legitimate opportunity to be successful. Because you're right, so many of those young men and women are in different spaces and have different levels of learning and issues, and we have to attack that collectively and individually. So I agree. I agree.
So a comment, then a question. Thank you for that, DeWitt, because I had honestly totally forgotten about the Children's Fund. And when Reverend Burgess and I were putting together sort of the list of everyone that we wanted to put in a room, I don't think we had listed the county. And so I think we definitely need to add the county to our list. So thank you for that reminder. One of the issues that have come up, at least that's been brought to me, Representative Wheatley, is funding. Funding for children, what levels of funding is appropriate. And I don't fully understand how the state determines the funding for schools. So if you could just educate us a little on how the state determines how much funding should go to schools, or what that criteria is.
Yeah, I'm still trying to learn it myself, Daniel. We've had for years a very convoluted system of how we funded schools. Quite frankly, we have underfunded schools in many respects, based off of the rationale that we wanted to spread around everyone getting a little bit of something. We have a clause, we have a funding clause that is called the hold harmless. So every district gets what they got the year before, irrespective of kids, irrespective of growth or losses. But on top, a couple years ago, we came up with this fair funding solution for education, but we only push new dollars through that. So that's less than 8% of our state spend goes through this new fair funding formula. Now I'm gonna tell you, Pittsburgh is a different, Pittsburgh is an anomaly as it relates to our school funding. Pittsburgh has a large local component. It has a very healthy local support system. Pittsburgh funds per student higher than levels of Mount Lebanon and some of our more suburban, wealthier districts. I think we're either 25,000 per student. A statewide average is somewhere like around $8,500, $9,400 per student. We're in the higher end of per people's funding. Now, I always say you have to take that and understand that when you have more challenged students who come from different family structures and needs, you can't get caught up in the per pupil spending, because that will skew you from understanding what the actual needs of students might be. One child need might be that full amount, another child might not need that amount of support, but because you do a system wide, that's the average of how it averages out. So, Pittsburgh, from a funding perspective, in my opinion, probably gets a healthy dose of what it needs. Now, doesn't mean that it gets it the way it needs it, probably not, because even within the district, there are disparities from school to school. There's a disparity of how schools are funded even inside of these systems. So that's a broader conversation. That's a much more, we could have a show just on that, how we do our school funding, how the resources are allocated, how is it impactful, or are they giving us the returns that we need? The long story short, though, I will say resources are necessary to still come into this district to help our students. Because if you're going to do a catch up, There's so those some of those kids that need caught up and need that specialized attention and that the more tutorial support, you need to put more funding to help them. You know what I'm saying? And so there has to be a way to figure that out. Yes, DeWitt, I see.
Jake, you said something that is critically important, and because when you look at school districts and you look at the how their municipalities and areas operate, and even and then when you layer in things like charter schools, the students with fewer challenges are leaving the system for other educational opportunities, and as a result, it is very easy to have a higher proportion or a higher percentage of children with special needs, learning disabilities, and those kinds of issues concentrated in that district. And as a result, there's a greater need for resources to try to level the playing field out, and that very frequently is not there. So you make some really good points, and these are the kinds of conversations that we need to have and information that needs to be shared. And these are tough conversations, but they have to be had and solutions generated.
And Daniel, I didn't ask you, I mean, primarily a lot of your school district funding comes from your local property tax. Your local property tax. So if you have a district like Wilkinsburg with a high property tax, but their return on what they can invest in their education is almost nil to none because it's maxed out. Pittsburgh is the so property taxes being the fundamental predominant way of school funding. And by the way, since the, I think, early 70s, middle 70s, the state's share of funding for education has decreased. We used to fund at 50% clip. I think we're down now to the 35, 36%. So every reduction in the state share means the pressures on local shares to come up. That means your local property taxes to come up. So it's a very unfair way of doing our school funding, in my belief. And I think that's why you have disparate treatment of how some district has an overabundance of resources, others have less so. The needs aren't necessarily being met where they needs to. But again, I say city of Pittsburgh in this conversation is a little different in how this funding conversation goes, but it still needs to have resources to do what we need it to do.
I want to just share, before we leave the educational thing, I do want to share something that Jake brought up and that has been impactful for me. I have 4 children. All my children are grown now and all through college, but all of them had differing educational capacity. Some of them had struggles and had various difficulties. I used to be in the business of out-of-time school support. I ran an agency that provided those resources. And so I went on a retreat with, sponsored by the school board. Roosevelt was the superintendent. And they brought in a national expert that taught me something that I never forgot. And it really has been the way I've looked at kids ever since. He said the hardest thing for a kid to ever do is to walk and talk by the age of 4. That any kid that could walk and talk by the age of 4 has the capacity, the intellectual ability to do any academic thing. The hardest thing they'll ever do is walk and talk by 4. So if they can talk by 4, they have the capacity intellectually to do anything academically. That means they could be engineers, nuclear scientists. The difference is, as you were saying, Jake, kids learn differently and have readiness stages. The question isn't, can the kids do it? They absolutely can. The question is, can we educate them in a way that we're meeting them where they're at and taking them where they need to go? And so the problem is, we don't use the word achievement gap as much. We use opportunity gap. The problem is not the kids, it's not their education, it's not their race. It's that we have not yet devised a system to take advantage of their genius and give them the instruction they need at the appropriate time in the appropriate way. And I'm absolutely committed, doing that, for my kids. I have been committed to doing it for my kids, but I'm committed to doing that for all kids. And thank you for letting me kind of share that story. I want to talk a little bit about the county. I know the county has been really, really busy. Liv, I know one of your work has been on the county's paid sick leave work and fighting for that. Can you tell us a little bit about? We've already kind of handled that in the city, but what are you doing in the county on the paid sick leave front?
Well, we just literally maybe like an hour and a half ago, DeWitt's laughing because, sorry, Councilman Walton's laughing because he was there with me at the Health and Human Services Committee meeting. We met again today to try to, well, we did go through some more amendments to, there were a good number of amendments presented to this bill. So we are working through those. And so we have not exhausted all the amendments so that we weren't able to actually complete our work today to get that back up to full council for a full vote. So I expect that there'll be another meeting scheduled within a week or two for us to continue that work to be able to bring that up to full council hopefully by the end of February, but please don't hold me to that date. Our work is not exactly predictable all the time. So, but we are working and trying as hard as we can to get that passed because we know there are a lot of working folks that are depending on it.
Thank you. DeWitt, are there any other pieces of legislation that you all are working on the county level?
Yeah, Liv and I talked earlier today, and we talked earlier today, didn't we, Liv?
We did.
Or was it yesterday?
It might have been
It was
yesterday.
But we've been, about 2.5 years ago, I introduced the Independent Police Review Board legislation. It didn't pass. It died. I reintroduced it in January. Liv introduced a piece last year. I reintroduced it last January. Liv introduced it a piece later, and we've been struggling with it for a while. I think we are really, really, really close. I talked. Yeah, it was yesterday, Liv. It was yesterday, and so we have a piece of legislation. I think that we've been negotiating around, and so we're going to get to Liv tomorrow a new piece of legislation. Liv has withdrawn her piece of legislation. I'm going to withdraw mine, and if Liv agrees, hopefully, Liv, Paul Klein, and myself will be co-sponsors of a new piece of legislation for the Independent Police Review Board. Okay. So we've come a long, 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 long way.
God is good.
And so, we've been talking. I think there's a spirit of collaborativeness, and we understand the importance and the criticality of getting a document passed that moves our collective agenda forward. So conversation is good, the spirit is good, and there's hope.
That is wonderful to hear.
Yeah, it's great to hear. Hey, Jake, when a few, I guess it was last summer, maybe, or maybe the summer before last, I can't remember because of COVID, because every day is becoming the same. You linked Councilman Lavelle and I with members of Philadelphia City Council and state legislators talking about statewide initiatives to talk about Act 11 and arbitrators and to talk about police reform. I have not heard much from that group. I'm certain both Philadelphia and the state are still working on those things. I know that Summer, part of our group, had initiated legislation to to do some things. I think so had Ed Gainey. So where is, in terms of a state level, how are things moving in terms of police reform?
Yeah, let me first highlight again. I wanna just add something. What Liv and DeWitt just talked about, I think is critical for us to celebrate and recognize, because we don't do this enough, but I think this is what is going to be required in order for us to collectively defeat these antiquated systems and to transform them. And that is collaboration of like-minded people. Even though we find differences in the way we want to approach something, we are committed to trying to help our community collectively, and to have them both agree to step back from their own personal initiatives and then say that we want to collaborate and pull it together so that we can be successful. I think that's something that we got to highlight and congratulate. And really, I was laughing and joking, but for real, I'm real serious. I commend you both for what you just did. And Rev, these COVID days and COVID nights got us all thinking we're in a continuum of the same day, you know. And so with the statewide initiative, which was led by City Councilman Isaiah Thomas out of Philadelphia, I don't think they've had many additional meetings, because as we got closer to the end of the year, the holidays got into it. Yeah.
We did have a meeting in December.
Okay.
We did have a meeting. I want to say we did have a meeting in January. And what we're working on is doing a collective letter. Actually, I think that the collective letter went up to Madam Leader McClinton to ask that Act 111, and it was in conjunction with, I believe, Representative Bullock is going to be introducing some type of legislation that addresses Act 11. So our letter, which had signatures from myself and Bethany, some other members of City Council, and just a coalition across the state, went to Rep. McClinton, and we should be meeting again sometime this month, maybe within the next week or two.
Oh, so see, Rev, I got bumped off the list. Liv is up on it. I got bumped off the list. I'm gonna have to talk to Isaiah about that. You know what happened? But no, either way, Donna Bullock, who's the chairwoman of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus now, and of course, Leader McClinton, who is now the leader of the Democrats in the State House. They are both ably bodied and maneuvering this thing. I know our other criminal justice bills, they are being ready to be reintroduced. I know mine is being ready to be reintroduced. I think Ed and Summer, their bills are being ready to be reintroduced. They never got to the finish line in last session. We're going to put as much pressure as we can to reintroduce them, to keep the pressure on. So the governor just announced a task force around the police accountability. I think our own local former detective Brenda Tate is one of the members of the task force. So there's a lot of activities, but like anything else, we have to stay diligent. This system is not going to be changed easily. There are a lot of, as you all know, there are a lot of pressures to push back. Changing Act 111 is not going to be easy. You know, so we'll keep you informed. And again, Liv is on there. I'll have to recheck, make sure you all are on the list too. But I think there's a lot of work still out there to be done.
Currently, Councilman Lavelle and I think it comes up for us next week. We introduced legislation to ban no-knock warrants in the city, and that adds to the list of maybe 8 or 9 police reform bills we've passed, I suppose, in the last 6 months. So that's the next one that we're working on.
Can we transfer a little bit and talk about COVID and the pandemic that we're still in? As you all are all well aware, last weekend, in partnership with the county, with University of Pittsburgh, and many organizations in Homewood as well as in the Hill District, Homewood vaccinated 1,000 seniors last weekend, as well as in the Hill District, we vaccinated 1,000 seniors. With that being said, from what I can gather, and correct me if I'm wrong, Representative Wheatley, our state has still been one of the slower states to really roll out the vaccine. There are also other states that where people can somehow actually get the vaccine at home. We just brought in a new Secretary of Health, I believe, if I'm correct. And if you could just talk to us a little bit about what's happening on the state level in terms of getting more vaccines to local municipalities to get rolled out. If there have been any changes to our policy. There's also been a lot of people have asked me, and I don't know the answer to this, and maybe be a local answer, which I would have to find out more, but how we're determining what the levels are. So right now we're sort of in level 1A, which is 65 and over. But when will teachers be able to access it? When will the general public be able to access it? So if you could just educate us a little, and then maybe DeWitt or Liv, if you want to educate us a little from the county perspective, that might be.
And this is not my field of expertise. I think what a lot of this has happened because of the lack of leadership from the national government, the confusion around the state process. We had worked out a state plan. It got kind of changed at the last minute with the CDC coming out with an expanded role of putting everyone over 65 into the first phase. The 1A is what you're calling it. Because originally, many of the essential workers, teachers included, were in the state plan, originally part of our first 1A distribution rollout. By the way, they are still in there, but they just have to meet these federal conditions, 65 and over, or one of these pre-existing conditions. They are still in there, but primarily they're in our next phase of 1B. But the rollout has really not been to the level that we wanted it. I think they are working on trying to work with the county. I know the county gets information at the last minute. They want the information to come a little faster, a little more in advance. The state wants the same thing. And again, this is where I go and say it's a systemic failure of leadership from the nationals, then to the state, and then on down. We're trying to work through it as fast as we can, as best we can. Again, they just created a new task force to the vaccination rollout task force, which the caucuses in Harrisburg now have a member that's on that, working with the administration to try to make sure we are rolling it out as best we can. But right now, the first phase is really for those 65 and up, those who are in our long-term nursing facilities. They're still, I think they were talking about this opportunity to deliver. I think this is where the federal folk are talking about delivering them straight to some of these pharmacies and some of these other outlets to get it out there faster. It's embarrassing that West Virginia, out of all states, West Virginia is doing the best job in rolling out the vaccination to this point. And that's primarily because they make it readily accessible using as many outlets as they can. And getting it as to the people as fast as they can. So I don't know if Liv or DeWitt has anything to add from the county.
Also interestingly today was a update to county council around the vaccine and COVID update with the administration and Dr. Bogan. I was going to actually yield to you, DeWitt, if you were able to make that meeting. Otherwise, I could read the notes that were sent to us because I was not able to make that meeting.
I wasn't able to make the meeting, but I got a follow-up briefing from the administration later on today, and the challenge is supply. There has to be greater availability of supply. In Allegheny County, there is about 18, just right at 18% of the Allegheny County population that has received vaccinations. And the reason for the emphasis on those seniors is that the mortality rate increases exponentially for every decade over 60 years of age. The exposure, the death rate increases exponentially for each decade, 60, 70, 80, and the like. And so it all comes back to increasing supply. And again, it goes back to the failure of national leadership to make decisions, that decisions that were made 6 and 8 months ago that is hamstringing the effort for vaccinations today. So if there's a specific question, I'll try to answer it. But that was the conversation from a general perspective.
Yeah, I was about to say, I have the numbers in front of me, so I can definitely share those. To date, there have been approximately 250,000 vaccines received in Allegheny County. But of those 250,000 vaccines, only 11% of those actually went to the county health department. 89% of those have been distributed to the health systems, pharmacies, and federally qualified health systems. The county health department is not distributing that 89% category, but is directly coming from, but that is directly coming from the state. So that 89% the county never even sees, the county health department never even sees. It is distributed directly by the state to those health systems and pharmacies and federally qualified health systems. And then the county department has no jurisdiction over how or who gets vaccinated from that 89% category. So those were like the overarching highlights that were sent to us from that meeting.
Thank you. Very helpful. Rev, do you have a question? If not, I do want to go to Micah, who has been monitoring the questions online to see if there's any pressing questions from the viewing public.
Good evening. I think there was one about how Black businesses can get resources from the state in the middle of the pandemic. More information on that.
Yeah, so we just passed a bill. I think it was over $900 million of support for different nonprofits, for businesses. The money will be coming to the counties. The counties will have the opportunity to run the business support money. They could either partner with CDFIs or one of the CEOs, and it will be similar to our state program that we just had a couple of months ago. I think the county allocation, the last number, now I might have this wrong, but the last numbers I saw be about 79 million I think it's 79 million, which 13 million of which might be direct aid for businesses that are in the hospitality industry, so to speak. So I might have that wrong. Whit?
Is what you're talking about, the last CARES package that expired December 31st, or is this the new piece of legislation?
The new piece that we just passed last week. I think the
Okay.
governor signed it last week. It should be, the rules and regs should be promulgated in the next week or so, 10 days maybe. And then the counties will, I'm not sure what the county's process will be. I'm not sure if they've started the conversation yet, but stay tuned, because as we get this up and running, it'll probably be on our Department of Community and Economic Affairs, Community and Economic Development web page. But as we get more information, I'll make sure you all get it.
Thank you. And I think our other question might also be directed towards you about the state rent moratorium and what support for renters may look like.
There's support in that package as well. I can't remember the dollar amount for the support for the rental and mortgage assistant. Again, that will be, all of our supports are going to come to the counties first, and then the county's program. And again, the county has their already systemic programs set up and they'll be more able to tell you how to access their program. But the state support are going to come to the counties. The counties will then run it through their programs that they have pre-established.
So I know the last time that the CARES Act money came down and we did rent relief, it was actually funneled through Action Housing. And then from out from Action Housing's actually like kind of subcontracted with different community organizations to kind of get the word out there and to help folks get through the application process. So I was doing that through Take Action Mon Valley, but Sister PGH was doing some of that, and different organizations throughout the county. So I imagine it will look something similar then to that when it is rolled out.
And I
the executive has indicated that those dollars will flow through Action Housing again in this package as well.
Yeah, and this is the state money. This is $912 million of state aid. This is going to be on top of whatever the feds do in this next round, where you hear the president talking about $1.9 trillion, of which if the allocation is similar to what they did prior, Pennsylvania could be looking at anywhere between $3 to $4 billion of additional federal aid. That won't all be for rental, that won't all be for business, but a sizable chunk of that will then be probably repositioned back to the counties and cities. This is the state and the city will get its own direct allocations, but you know that this is an addition. So I will say to people, this is a short-term relief packet, and then we're hoping that the federal folk give some state and local aid that will be an addition, which we're hoping very much.
One of the problems with a lot of the federal dollars, though, is that many local nonprofit, faith-based, and local businesses were unable to access them because they don't have the requisite, like you have to have really a payroll system, pretty much. If you don't have a payroll system, then if you pay cash or if you pay by checks, you would not have the proper documentation to apply. And so as a result, and I'm curious as we have this conversation what your experiences were, but it seems like we still have a lot of Black businesses going under, Black restaurants, Black businesses that just can't survive in this current environment, and that probably will have to come back in a different form, probably cannot reopen under the same structure. I've seen numbers as high as 50% of Black-owned businesses may fail during the pandemic. Has that been your experiences, guys? That's been sort of my sense of it.
Nationally, I think the numbers have said about 40 to 50% of Black businesses will not survive, have not survived this challenging time, which is unacceptable in my mind's eye, but it is the reality. And I do agree with you, because we have to push aid down through the systems that we already have. And these systems were not built prior to the pandemic, weren't built really with the mind of supporting and building capacity in Black-owned businesses. So once again, we're caught in this conversation around the inequalities of systems. And then this pandemic hit that exposes just further exacerbated those inequalities, which is why I think it's critical for us. When I say us, it's not just the Black faces that are in these systems, it's everybody who has a part in the system to come together, take stock of what we are learning in this time and do it differently, build and reestablish and direct resources so that we are helping to reestablish these businesses in these communities so that they're able to be strengthened and protected if and when something else happens like this.
Thank you, Representative Wheatley. We have come up on our time for today. What I also just want to articulate for those who may be watching from the city, all the resources that we have that have been gone, that are there to support businesses are at the Urban Redevelopment Authority, as well as the money that we have to support those struggling with rent and things of that nature. You can also contact the Urban Redevelopment Authority via the Housing Opportunity Fund if you're needing support. And so I would send those watching to those resources as well. But with that said, that is all the time we have for today. We do want to thank our guests, State Representative Jake Wheatley, County Councilwoman Olivia Bennett, and County Councilman DeWitt Walton. In order to have significant investment in the Black community, it is imperative that we make our community safe and peaceful and prosperous, and that is only done by building coalitions. And I want to thank the Pittsburgh Black Elected Officials Coalition for being one of our strongest partners and allies.
I want to thank all of you for watching and participating in this town hall meeting. Remember, you can watch this show on Facebook, the city's YouTube channel, or the city's cable channel. A new meeting occurs every Wednesday. By working together, united in purpose, we can transform our city, strengthen it for all of its residents. Pittsburgh can only be a city for all when it becomes a city where Black Pittsburgh matters. Take the vaccine as soon as you can, stay safe, and be blessed.